The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had stood for 10,000 years on the planet called Prime. It was a massive circular room where representatives from 47 alien species gathered to make decisions that affected billions of lives across the stars. High Arbiter Osh had led these meetings for 300 years, and he had seen many things in his long life. He had seen wars begin and end. He had seen species rise to greatness and fall to ruin. But he had never seen anything quite like what happened on that quiet morning when the humans decided to leave. Humanity had joined the galactic community 43 years ago. They arrived in ships that the other species considered primitive and barely functional. The engineers had laughed at human technology. The diplomats had questioned whether such a young and violent species deserved a place among the stars, but the council had voted to accept them on a trial basis. They were given a small territory on the edge of known space. They were given limited trading rights. They were given a single seat in the council chamber, but no real power to vote on important matters. Commander Cole remembered the day humanity was accepted into the galactic community. He had been 12 years old and watching the broadcast with his parents in their small apartment. His mother had cried tears of joy. His father had opened a bottle of wine that the family had saved for generations. Everyone believed that this was the beginning of something wonderful. Everyone believed that humanity had finally found its place among the stars. Now was 55 years old. His hair had turned grey and his face showed the weight of many difficult years. He stood on the bridge of the Earth ship called Distant Hope and looked out at the stars through the forward window. Behind him, his crew worked in silence. Lieutenant Amy Shaw watched the communication screens with tired red eyes. Chief Engineer Hart ran tests on systems that did not need testing just to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. The message from Earth had arrived 6 hours ago, had read it 17 times because he could not quite believe what it said. Humanity was leaving, all of them. Every human in galactic space was going home and they were never coming back. Amy spoke in a voice that was barely louder than a whisper. She told that the convoy was ready. 37 civilian ships and 12 military escorts were waiting for his signal. Nearly 800,000 human beings were out there in space waiting for him to lead them home. Asked if there had been any response from the council about their departure notice, Amy shook her head. There was nothing official. A few private messages had come from individual aliens. The ambassador had sent something that might have been an expression of sympathy, but the translation software was not certain. Almost smiled at that. In 43 years, humanity had never quite figured out the language. They had 17 different words for duty and obligation, but not a single word for forgiveness. He gave the order to send the signal. They would leave in 1 hour. On Prime, the council was holding an emergency session. High Arbiter Osh activated the speaking crystal, and the murmur of conversation died away. He announced that this session was called to formally recognize humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. Ambassador X of the rose from his seat. His scaled face showed something that looked like satisfaction. He said that the council should note that humanity had accepted thee in the matter of the border dispute. He said that their departure was appropriate. Several delegations made sounds of agreement. The representative was a being made of flowing light who called itself Illuminance of Morning. It pulsed with what the translation system described as vindication. It reminded everyone that humanity had been warned. The human colony on claimed territory would not be tolerated. They had been given the chance to move their people. They had chosen to refuse. High Arbiter Osh slowly. The facts were not being disputed. The human colony on a world called Horizon's Edge had been built in space that both humans and claimed. When the council ruled in of the humans were ordered to remove their 47,000 settlers within 1 standard year, they had refused to comply. A quiet voice interrupted the discussion. Ambassador of the stood with her hands folded in front of her. She was one of the few who had taken a human-style name, and this had always confused her colleagues. She reminded everyone that the humans had asked for an extension. They had requested 3 additional years to complete the evacuation. The colony had hospitals and schools. There were children who had never known any other home. X dismissed this as irrelevant. He said the law was clear. Disputed territory claims were resolved by council arbitration. The council had ruled for human attachment to buildings and dirt did not override interstellar law. Continued in her calm voice, she said that they had been permitted to act on the ruling. 47,000 humans were given only 6 months to leave. This was physically impossible given the number of ships available to transport them. When the deadline passed, the forces moved in. Illuminance of Morning insisted that they had shown restraint. No humans were killed in the operation. Agreed that no one was killed directly, but she described what had actually happened. Humans were taken from their homes in the middle of the night. They were loaded onto cargo ships like freight. They were dropped on the nearest human world without warning. Families were separated in the chaos and confusion. Property was seized without compensation. 18 humans died in the weeks that followed from stress and medical emergencies caused by the trauma. The youngest was 7 years old. The chamber fell silent. Continued, she said that humanity had come to this council asking for justice. They asked for an investigation into how the removal was conducted. They asked for that the process had been cruel and inhumane. They asked for something very simple. She paused before saying the word. They asked for an apology. X responded immediately. He said the request had been denied as it should have been. They acted within their legal rights. Human emotional reactions to a lawful action did not constitute a legitimate grievance. Looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 47 species. She said that this was why the humans were leaving, all of them, every human in council space. They had filed their withdrawal notice that morning. They had asked for nothing. They had demanded nothing. They had made no threats and issued no ultimatums. They were simply going away. High Arbiter Osh shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In his 300 years of life he had seen species threaten war over council decisions. He had seen alliances shattered and ambassadors recalled in fury. He had seen demands and ultimatums and declarations of eternal hatred. He had never seen this. He had never seen a species simply stand up and quietly walk away without a word. X waved a dismissive hand. He said the council should let them go. He said humanity had always been too emotional for galactic society. They were too attached to primitive ideas about fairness and feelings. The council would be better without them. There were sounds of agreement from around the chamber, though perhaps fewer than there might have been an hour earlier. High Arbiter Osh asked if there was any other business to discuss. There was not. The session ended and the representatives returned to their duties. None of them understood what had just happened. None of them realized what they had lost, but they would learn. In time they would all learn. 6 months passed after humanity left, and at first nobody noticed their absence. Humanity had always been a small presence in the galactic community. They were a young species with unremarkable technology and little economic importance. Their departure was recorded in the administrative files and then promptly forgotten. The galaxy moved on with its business as if nothing had changed. Then the small problems started to add up. Merchant captain of the trading consortium was the first to file a formal complaint with the council. Her ship, called the Profitable Venture, had suffered a catastrophic engine failure in the outer reaches far from any populated system. This was not unusual. Ships broke down all the time in the vastness of space. The standard procedure was to broadcast a distress signal and wait for the nearest vessel to respond. Remembered a time 3 years earlier when she had been in a similar situation. The nearest vessel had been a human freighter. It arrived within hours of her distress call. The human crew had worked without rest for 3 days to repair her ship. When she asked how much she owed them, the human captain had refused payment. He said only that she should help someone else if she got the chance. Had found this very strange at the time. Now stranded again with a failing life support system, she broadcast her distress signal and waited. She waited for 1 day, then 2 days, then 5 days, then 11 days. By the time a patrol ship finally responded, 3 members of her crew had died from lack of oxygen. She filed her complaint with the council and demanded to know why no one had come to help. The response she received was coldly bureaucratic. Emergency response was not a council obligation. Each species was responsible for its own ships. Assistance to vessels of other species was provided on a voluntary basis, and most species only responded to distress calls from their own kind. Check the historical records. In 43 years, humanity had responded to over 12,000 distress calls from ships belonging to other species. They never asked for payment. They never demanded anything in return. They simply showed up and helped whoever needed helping. She asked a council administrator why the humans had done this. The administrator did not have an answer. No one had ever thought to ask the humans that question while they were still around to answer it. The second thing that people noticed was the silence in the cultural archives. Humanity had been enthusiastic participants in the galactic cultural exchange. They shared their art and their music and their literature freely with any species that wanted access. Thousands of years of human creative work was uploaded to the galactic networks and offered without charge or restriction. Most species had ignored it. Human art was considered primitive by galactic standards. Their music was thought to be discordant and strange. Their stories were filled with odd concepts that other species did not understand. Ideas like redemption and sacrifice and hope against impossible odds seemed foolish to civilizations that had existed for millions of years. But some beings had listened in private. Ambassador of the had a secret collection of human recordings. She had never told anyone about this because culture valued emotional control above all else. To admit that human music made her feel things that she could not name would have been deeply shameful. Now alone in her quarters, she played the recordings one final time. The humans called this kind of music a symphony, did not fully understand the technical aspects. She knew it involved instruments made of wood and metal that vibrated the air in precise patterns, but the effect those patterns had on her was something she could not explain. There was a moment in one piece where the music built layer upon layer until it became something vast and overwhelming. The first time heard it, she did not know what she was feeling. They had no word for this emotion. The humans did. They called it transcendence. She had once asked a human colleague named Murphy why human music often made beings feel this way. Had thought carefully before. She said it might be because humans knew what it felt like to be small, to stand under a sky full of stars and understand that they were brief and fragile things in an enormous universe. She said human music was a way of reaching for something bigger than themselves, trying to touch something eternal even knowing they never could. Had asked if that was sad, had smiled and said that sometimes it was, but there was also joy in the reaching. Even if you never arrived at your destination, the journey itself had meaning. The attempt mattered even if it failed. Had not understood those words at the time. Now sitting in silence after the music ended, she thought she was beginning to understand. 3 months later, the delegation requested a special session of the council. This was extremely unusual. There were crystalline beings who existed partly in dimensions that other species could not perceive. They rarely communicated, and when they did, their messages were often impossible to understand. Most species had learned to simply nod politely when they spoke, and then move on to other business. But they had formally requested a session, and the council was required to grant it. High Arbiter Osh opened the proceedings and recognized the representative. The being was a cluster of living crystals that the translation system identified as something like resonance of distant frequencies. It pulsed with light as it spoke. They said that they had been observing, they had been calculating, they had been modeling the probable futures. The chamber waited in confusion. Statements were rarely this direct. They continued. They said the humans had departed and they had not spoken at the time because they did not typically involve themselves in biological affairs, but they had run projections of what would happen next, and they found themselves concerned. High Arbiter Osh asked what concerned them. They said that humans had performed functions that no one had categorized. They filled roles that no one had defined. They provided services that no one asked for and no one acknowledged. The High Arbiter asked for examples. They said they had identified 7,847 distinct examples, emergency rescue operations like the one merchant captain had needed, cultural exchange, medical assistance to species whose biology the humans did not share, diplomatic mediation between parties who had no reason to trust each other, free of technology, the creation of neutral meeting places, the maintenance of communication networks, the protection of endangered species, the preservation of dying cultures. High Arbiter Osh said that many of these functions were also performed by other species. They agreed that this was technically accurate. Other species did perform similar functions for their allies, for their trading partners, for beings they considered valuable. The humans had performed these functions for everyone, for strangers, for rivals, for species that had never done anything for humanity in return. The chamber was silent. They said they had modeled the next 50 years without human involvement. Their calculations showed that 17 minor conflicts would grow into major wars. 4 species currently struggling to survive would become extinct. Trade efficiency would decline by 23%. Cultural diversity would shrink dramatically. And the overall level of trust between species would fall below the minimum needed to maintain a stable civilization. High Arbiter Osh asked if they were saying that humans had been important. They said they were saying something more than that. The humans had been acting as connective tissue in a body that did not know it had any. They were the threads holding the fabric together. Without them, the galaxy would slowly begin to fall apart, slowly at first, then all at once. The chamber remained silent for a long time after the finished speaking. No one knew what to say. No one wanted to admit that they might have made a terrible mistake. Commander Cole had never wanted to become a symbol of anything. When he led the convoy away from Council space, he was thinking only about practical problems. How to coordinate 37 civilian ships traveling together through deep space. How to keep 800,000 displaced people fed and healthy and hopeful during the long journey. How to answer the questions of frightened children who did not understand why they had to leave everything they knew behind. A young girl named Sophie asked him that question directly. She was 8 years old, and her family had lived on the orbital station above Prime for 3 generations. She had never set foot on Earth. She did not know what grass felt like or what rain sounded like or what it meant to breathe air that had not been recycled through a machine. Sophie asked why they had to go. She asked if they had done something wrong. Knelt down so he could look into her eyes. He told her that she had not done anything wrong. None of them had done anything wrong. Sophie asked why they were leaving then. Thought carefully about how to explain something so complicated to a child. He asked her if she knew what happened when you tried to be friends with someone who did not want to be your friend. Sophie slowly, she said they would not invite you to their birthday party. Said it was something like that. He told her that humanity had tried very hard to be part of this galactic family. They tried to help everyone, they tried to share what they had, they tried to make things better for everyone they met, but the family had decided they did not want humanity around, and when that happened the right thing to do was to leave with dignity, to walk away without screaming or crying or making threats. Because the way you left told people something important about who you really were. Sophie asked what it told them. Smiled even though his heart was breaking inside his chest. He said it told them that humanity did not need approval from others to know their own worth. It told them that humans could stand on their own feet, with their heads held high no matter what anyone else thought of them. Sophie said that sounded very hard to do. Agreed that it was one of the hardest things in the world, but he told her that humans could do hard things. They had been doing hard things since the beginning of their history. The convoy reached Earth's solar system after 14 months of travel, stood on the bridge of the distant Hope, and watched through the viewport as the sun grew larger and brighter. He had expected to feel relief when he finally saw home again. Instead, he felt something closer to grief. Earth was beautiful, the swirling white clouds and blue oceans and green and brown continents. This was the world where humanity had been born, where they had learned to stand upright and use tools and dream of reaching the stars. This was the only home they had now. The government of United Earth sent ships to meet the convoy at the edge of the solar system. President Miranda addressed the returning citizens through a broadcast that reached every ship. She welcomed them home, all of them, every single one. She said that preparations had been made for their return, housing was ready, jobs were available, schools were open for the children, medical care was arranged for the elderly and sick, whatever they needed would be provided. Listened to the president's words and thought about everything they had lost. Not the territory or the trading rights or the political influence. Those things were just numbers on a spreadsheet. What they had lost was the chance to show the galaxy what humanity could become. The opportunity to prove that a young species from an ordinary planet in an unremarkable corner of the universe could rise to something greater than itself. Humans had wanted so badly to belong, to be accepted, to be seen as equals among the ancient civilizations of the stars. The galaxy had looked at them and decided they were not worthy. And so they had left, not in anger, not in defeat, just quietly and completely, taking nothing with them but their dignity and their wounded hearts. Back on Prime, Ambassador stood in her empty office and thought about what had happened. She had argued against the Council's decision. She had spoken for 3 hours explaining the legal problems and moral failures and long-term consequences of treating humanity so badly. No one had listened to her. Now she understood something that her colleagues did not yet see. The humans had not been defeated. They had not lost anything except their illusions about what the galaxy really was. They had been shown the true nature of their neighbors, and they had decided that those neighbors were not worth the pain of staying. There was a human phrase that Murphy had taught her years ago, had said that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away. Had asked how walking away could be brave. She said that walking away meant giving up. Had shaken her head. She said walking away meant yourself enough to stop accepting bad treatment. It meant recognizing that some fights were not worth winning. It meant understanding that your own peace and dignity were more important than proving a point to people who would never listen anyway. Watched the last human supply ship leave Council space and disappear into the darkness between stars. She thought about's words and finally understood what they meant. The humans had made a statement, not with speeches or protests or threats or demands, just with departure, just with silence, just with absence. And in that silence they had said something that the Council was only beginning to hear. They had said that the galaxy had them, that humanity was there and ready to give everything they had, and the galaxy threw them away like garbage. Now the galaxy would have to live with the silence where humanity used to be. 2 years after the departure, the First War began. It was a small conflict by galactic standards. The trading consortium and the hive mind had been about mineral rights in an asteroid belt for decades. The Council had mediated this dispute many times before and always found a temporary compromise that both sides could accept. This time there was no one to suggest compromise. The human diplomatic corps had always been present at such negotiations, not because humans had any personal interest in the outcome, but because they genuinely believed that all conflicts could be solved through talking. They would spend months or even years going back and forth between the fighting parties looking for common ground and proposing creative solutions. The End had found this annoying. Who were these newcomers to involve themselves in ancient disputes between superior civilizations? But somehow they had always ended up accepting the compromises that humans proposed. The alternatives were worse, and it was easier to accept a solution from a neutral party than to admit you could not defeat your enemy. Now there were no humans to propose anything. The End met alone without mediators, and within 6 hours weapons were fired. The war lasted 8 months, 14,000 died, 22,000 were killed. The asteroid belt they had been fighting over was completely destroyed by the weapons both sides used. Neither side won anything at all. And this was only the beginning of what was to come. The second thing that failed after humanity left was the refugee assistance system. Galactic civilization had always produced refugees. Natural disasters destroyed planets. Political conflicts forced populations to flee. Economic collapses left entire species homeless and drifting through space. The Council had official procedures for handling such emergencies, but those procedures were slow and complicated, and mostly designed to make sure that refugees did not become a burden on anyone important. Humanity had never followed those procedures. When they were struck by a burst of deadly radiation from a nearby dying star, the surface became unlivable within days. They had nowhere to go. Their ships were too small for long journeys. Their allies were too far away to help in time. The Council debated emergency aid measures for 7 weeks while families died by the thousands in overcrowded ships with failing life support. But a human convoy had arrived on the 3rd day after the disaster began. They had no official authorization to be there. They had no formal plan approved by any committee. They had simply heard that people were dying and they came to help. Captain Blake of the Earth vessel Open Arms established a refugee camp in orbit around a nearby moon within 48 hours of arrival. Human doctors treated wounded even though they had never studied biology before. Human engineers modified ships for extended survival even though the technology was completely unfamiliar to them. Human social workers helped separated families find each other in the chaos even though they could barely communicate across the language barrier. The governor had asked Captain Blake why the humans were doing this. They had nothing to offer in return. They could not repay this kindness. They were a broken and dying people with nothing left. Captain Blake had seemed confused by the question. He said simply that they needed help and the humans were nearby. Everything else was just details. They survived that disaster. They were reduced and traumatized, but they lived. They rebuilt slowly over the following years. They never forgot what the humans did for them when no one else cared. Now 5 years after humanity departed, the colony world was devastated by a massive volcanic eruption. Ash filled the atmosphere, temperatures dropped, crops failed, 4 million faced starvation and freezing death. There were no human ships to arrive uninvited with food and medicine and warm blankets. The council debated, committees were formed, reports were written, proposals were reviewed and reviewed again. By the time emergency aid was finally approved and delivered, there were only 600 survivors left out of 4 million. High Arbiter Osh began keeping a private list in his personal files. He did not share it with anyone, but he found himself during quiet moments adding to the record of things that had gone wrong since humanity left. The war with 36,000 dead, the disaster with nearly 4 million dead, the collapse of the neutral trade network with hundreds of stations closed and millions of jobs lost, the failure of the species preservation with 3 civilizations now extinct and 7 more approaching extinction, the communication breakdown of year 3 with 14 diplomatic incidents and 2 situations that nearly became wars. And underneath all these specific failures there was something harder to measure, a general feeling of coldness spreading through galactic civilization, a sense of isolation and distrust, each species into itself, each civilization expecting nothing from its neighbors except indifference or hostility. The humans had been the only species that acted as if everyone was in this together. They behaved as if the success of one civilization helped all civilizations. They treated kindness not as weakness but as strength. They seemed to genuinely believe that helping others made the helper stronger, not weaker. Osh had thought this attitude was naive and foolish. Now he wondered if the humans had simply understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten long ago. 5 years after the departure, Ambassador requested a private meeting with the High Arbiter. She came alone to his office carrying a small data crystal in her hand. Her face was tired, and her usual calm composure was cracked around the edges. She said she had been researching. For 5 years, she had been documenting everything humanity did during their time in Council space, every act of help, every gift given, every bridge built, every hand extended to strangers who had done nothing to deserve kindness. She placed the crystal on his desk. She said there were over 40,000 entries in the file, 40,000 examples of humans helping and healing and building and creating. 40,000 times they reached out to someone who had never done anything for them. Osh looked at the small crystal. He asked why she was showing this to him. Said she needed someone else to understand what had been lost. She said they did not just lose a minor species or a trading partner or a political ally. They lost something much more important than that. Her voice cracked as she searched for the right words. She said they lost the only people who believed in them, the only beings in the galaxy who looked at this fractured and cynical and selfish community and saw potential for something better. The humans thought the galaxy could improve. They acted as if improvement was possible even when everyone else proved again and again that it was not. Osh sat in silence for a long moment. He asked what wanted him to do about this situation. She said she wanted him to help her fix it. He asked how that was possible. The humans had left voluntarily. They chose to go. The council could not force them to return. Agreed that force was not possible, but she said the council could ask. They could acknowledge what they did wrong. They could apologize. The word hung in the air between them. Apologize. The Galactic Council had never apologized to anyone for anything in 10,000 years of existence. It was simply not done. An apology would be seen as weakness. Other species would lose respect for the council. The whole system might become unstable. Osh told her the council would never agree to such a thing. Leaned forward across his desk, she said he should show the other council members what she had found, let them see the evidence, let them understand exactly what they threw away, and then ask them whether their pride was truly worth the price everyone was now paying. Osh picked up the data crystal and turned it over in his hands. He thought about the list he had been keeping, all the dead, all the failures, all the slow unraveling of everything that held civilization together. He looked at and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. He said he would try. It took 2 more years to convince enough council members to support the idea, 2 years of arguments and debates and private negotiations, 2 years of showing them the evidence one piece at a time, 2 years of watching the galaxy continue to fall apart while politicians worried about appearances. But finally the vote was held. The motion passed by the narrowest possible margin. The Galactic Council would send a delegation to Earth. They would ask humanity to return, and they would do something that had never been done before in the history of galactic civilization. They would say they were sorry. The delegation arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system 7 years after humanity's departure. It was the largest diplomatic mission in the history of galactic civilization. Representatives from 42 species traveled together, including the who had never before participated in any biological diplomatic function. High Arbiter Osh led the mission personally, which had not happened in over 600 years. A single Earth ship came out to meet them at the boundary of the solar system. Commander Cole stood on the bridge of the distant Hope. He was 62 years old now, with more grey in his hair and more lines on his face. He had been called out of retirement for this meeting. Earth's government had debated for 3 months before agreeing to receive the delegation at all. The image of High Arbiter Osh appeared on the view screen. He thanked Commander Cole for receiving them. Studied the alien face on the screen. He remembered Osh from the old days. The High Arbiter had always been fair by council standards. He had never been openly hostile to humanity, but he had also done nothing to help when it mattered most. Said this visit was unexpected. He reminded the High Arbiter that the council had made its position on humanity very clear 7 years ago. Osh said that circumstances had changed. Asked if they really had. There was a long pause before Osh spoke again. When he did, his voice was different, softer, less formal, less like a politician and more like a person. He said they made a mistake. Felt something shift inside his chest. In 43 years of dealing with the council, he had never heard those words from any official. Osh continued. He said they made many mistakes. They did not see what humanity brought to the community. They did not value human contributions. They treated humans as intruders and children and annoyances. And when humanity asked for basic dignity and basic of their suffering, the council refused. He paused again before saying that they had come to apologize, not as a diplomatic strategy, not as a political. They came because they were wrong and they were finally able to admit it. Was quiet for a long moment before responding. He said that an apology was just words. Words were easy to say. He asked what the council intended to actually do. Osh said they would do whatever humanity asked. If humans wished to return to council space, they would be welcomed. If they wanted compensation for their losses, the council would negotiate in good faith. If they wished only to be left alone, that choice would be respected. But the delegation had to come. They had to say what needed to be said even if humanity chose not to accept it. Turned to look at his crew. Commander Amy Shaw met his eyes steadily. Chief Engineer Hart slowly. They had all waited a long time for this moment. Told Osh that he needed to consult with his government before giving any response. Osh said of course. He said the delegation would wait as long as necessary. The debate on Earth lasted 3 weeks. President called a planetary congress where every citizen was invited to speak. The question was simple: should humanity return to the galactic community or stay away forever? The arguments against returning were strong. The council had hurt them deeply. The council had dismissed and ignored them. The council had waited until they desperately needed humanity before even admitting that humanity mattered. But the arguments for returning were strong too. Dr. Maria Santos was a scientist who had worked with the refugees years ago. She spoke of all the species that still needed help, the cultures that were dying, the conflicts that were destroying lives while the council argued about procedures. She said humanity had the power to make things better, not for the council but for the innocent beings who suffered while politicians debated. Samuel was a teacher whose school had been destroyed during the forced evacuation from Horizon's Edge. He spoke of his students who asked him questions about the galaxy. They wanted to know if the aliens were really as cold and uncaring as everyone said. He did not want to tell them yes. He wanted his students to grow up believing that kindness could change things, but they could not believe that if humanity had given up on the galaxy entirely. And Sophie spoke. She was 15 years old now, and she remembered what Commander Cole had told her when she was 8. She said he told her that the way you leave shows people who you are. She had been thinking about that for years, but she thought the way you come back shows them something too. If humanity went back angry and demanding and treating others badly, then they would be just like the council. But if they went back the same way they left, with dignity and grace and heads held high, then they would show everyone who they really were. And maybe that would change something. The vote was held across the entire planet. 73% of humanity voted to return. The ceremony took place on Prime in the same council chamber where humanity had been judged and rejected 7 years before. This time there were no debates or arguments or species questioning whether humans deserved to be there. High Arbiter Osh read the formal apology into the official record. They acknowledged the suffering their actions had caused. The who had always criticized humanity, the most harshly delivered a statement that was not quite friendship but something close to genuine respect. Ambassador X said they had not understood humanity before. They saw human kindness as weakness and human optimism as foolishness. They thought the desire to help everyone must be a trick to gain advantage. They were wrong about all of it. Humans helped because they believed helping was right. They shared because they believed made everyone richer. They reached out because they believed connection was more valuable than isolation. X paused before admitting that his people did not yet know how to be like humans, but they would like to learn. Commander Cole stood at the podium representing all of humanity. He had prepared a careful speech that diplomats and politicians had reviewed and approved. He set that speech aside. He said humanity did not leave because they hated the galaxy. They left because staying would have destroyed who they were. Every time they were dismissed and diminished and told their pain did not matter, it took something from them. They realized that if they stayed long enough, they would eventually become just as cynical and cold as everyone else. He looked around the chamber at 47 species watching and listening. He said humans went home. They grieved and healed and waited, not for an apology because they never expected one. They waited because they knew that eventually the galaxy would understand, not because humans told them but because the universe itself would teach them the lesson. He took a breath before continuing. He said the galaxy was hard and cold and vast and did not care about any of them. The only warmth in the darkness came from each other. The only meaning came from connection. The only hope came from believing that tomorrow could be better than today. He spread his hands open. He said humanity was back not because the council asked or apologized. They came back because there was work to do. People needed help. Wounds needed healing. Bridges needed building. That was who humans were. That was who they had always been. He stepped back from the podium and said his final words quietly. No words needed, just understanding. The representative pulsed with light and spoke. It said new projections had been calculated. With humanity's return, the probability of wars had decreased dramatically. Extinctions would be prevented. trust levels would recover. They paused before adding that something unexpected had been observed, something they did not fully understand. The humans called it hope. It was a variable that had not previously included in their calculations. It did not follow logical patterns. It persisted even when evidence suggested it should fail. It spread between beings through methods that could not be measured. They said they believed hope might be the most important force in the galaxy, and the humans seemed to carry more of it than anyone else. Commander Cole returned to the distant Hope after the ceremony ended. He stood at the viewport watching the stars as he had done so many times before. Amy Shaw joined him. She said his speech was impressive. Smiled, he said it was not much of a speech, just the truth. Amy said the truth seemed to be enough sometimes. Through the viewport he could see other ships. Human ships returning to their old posts and setting up new stations and beginning again the work that had been abandoned 7 years ago. Amy asked if he thought this would last. She asked if the galaxy really understood now. Thought carefully before, he said he did not know for certain. Understanding was not a destination but a journey. The galaxy would forget sometimes. They would slip back into old habits. They would take humanity for granted again. Amy asked why they should come back then. Turned to face her, he said because that was what you did. When someone fell you helped them up, even if they would fall again, even if they did not say thank you, even if they did not deserve it. You helped because helping was right. You loved because love was better than hate. You hoped because hope was the only thing that made tomorrow worth living for. He turned back to the stars. He said they did not come back for the council. They came back for themselves, because this was who humanity was. This was who they chose to be, and nothing in the universe could take that away from them. Amy asked what happened next, straightened his uniform and smiled. He said now they got back to work. There was a whole galaxy out there that needed help. He said they should not keep them waiting.